Well, hello and welcome to the old garage number 22. That's double piece. And we do have some questions. We've got some silliness. We've got a shout out. And so let's get on with it. First question is from the Spyker episode. And it comes from James MacArthur. The question is that rear fender on that first car shown looks a little weird, almost like a swan head. What is going on there? Okay, well, what is going on there is that it is a mid-engine or underseat engine with chain drive, and the sprocket was rather forward, and so that swan head looking thing is actually a guard to prevent in case of a derailment or if a scarf gets in there or whatever, so that it's not dangerous. That's why it's there. Underneath that little bulbous portion is the drive gear coming out of the transmission to the chain drive to the rear. So that's what that is. And then I have another question again from James MacArthur, but this is regarding the Gary Hussar and the Canton Classic Car Museum episode, and he asks, I was surprised to hear that Canton sells some of their autos. I guess if you have limited space and want to rotate your inventory, you would have to. Is it common for car museums to sell their vehicles? Actually, yes. One of the things about a car museum is that it's more than just a collection of cars. It's a collection of people. And these are people who are collectors of vehicles, they are mechanics, they are body repairers and builders, etc. A car museum is actually a place where a lot of sales and trades happen, across museums and collectors. Many, if not most, museum exhibits are for sale because they're not necessarily owned by the museum, but are rather on loan or display from various patrons of the museum. And that's, in many cases, why they're there, is to be offered for sale, as well as most museums are going to have facilities to repair and maintain these vehicles, and oftentimes the collectors who own them don't necessarily have the space or the resources for that. The various car museums around the country, believe me, they do share their cars. They get transferred here and there. They sell them. They buy them. To continue moving inventory and moving, changing their displays and to also attract more customers. So it's a very common practice, and I'm not aware of too many museums, unless they're extremely specialized and very, very small, don't actively do that. So it's a good question. All right, and then from the Buick episode, I had a couple here. From Franz141, he asks, will you be doing an episode on the Michelin guide at some point? And is there more to it than the famous restaurant ratings? How did these restaurant ratings become so influential? Well, there is actually more to it. I probably should do an episode about it. But the Michelin guide, when it began, which was in 1904, was not so much, about restaurants, but rather about where you could find fuel, where you could find a garage, to do repairs, where you could find tires. Yeah, it's Michelin. But then they expanded it very shortly, specifically in Paris, because that's, where Andre Michelin's from. And to talk about what are some things that, now you're in a car, what can you go and see? What are some good tourist sites, what are some good restaurants, etc. And it grew from there. I did mention it briefly in the special that I did on inventing the wheel, and yeah, I probably should do an episode on it. So it's just going to be in a little while, but yeah, I'll do that. And then we have from same episode on Buick, Stannis the Manis. And he asked the question, he says, Buick Auto Vim and Power Company is a bit of an odd name. Is that Vim as in Vim and Vigor? Yes, it is. That is exactly what he had in mind. I'm not saying it was the best marketing ploy, but that's yeah, it was the Vim and Vigor, which is the idea of having, you know, power and energy, and that was, in the vernacular common at the time, and he wanted to play on it. So yeah, it actually was. Now on the episode on Adam Opel, Liz J, hey, hi Ginger Lily Longtoes, asked the following question, and she said, I love the decorative gold, it's usually scroll work on those old sewing machines. Do you know if these were painted on or were decals? Were they used on cars? Well, decaling and painting were both available in the late 19th century. Both were done on sewing machines. And it really had to do with the quality of the machines. The Opel machines were mostly hand painted with a gold paint, whereas your larger mass-produced American ones, like the Singers of the time, had some gold plating for the high-end machines, but the more, the cheaper ones were with decals, and decals could be done at the time. Now, when it comes to doing a car, the early ones, prior to World War I, were for the most part, if there was pinstriping on them, it was going to be hand painted. And because there wasn't really a technology at the time to decal an entire car versus something as small as a sewing machine. What they did eventually develop for the car industry was a decal tape, which is commonly done for pinstriping, today, and has been for a while. But also hand painting can also be found on cars too. So both were done, and if it's a decal pinstripe on a car, it's a tape decal, not a plate decal like you would have on a sewing machine. So there's the difference, but they were both very popular at the time. Now I have, wow, that was all the questions I had. But I do have some silliness, and here's the silliness we're doing today, because I was thinking of some of the features that could be found on some cars from pre-World War I. I'm not saying that these were available on all cars, but there were cars that had these features. And so today's silliness is the top 5 silliest features that could be found on pre-World I cars. And so we're going to go with number 5 first, and that is front seats. Now, before you get, well, wait a minute, my car's got a front seat. No, I mean a front seat in front of the front wheels. So if there's an accident, you, the passenger on the front seat, are the first on the scene. There were a lot of models of cars that did this. You have Peugeot did it, St. Louis did it, Errol Johnson did it. So there was a lot of different cars that had these front seats that were the passenger seats, because behind them was the engine and the trunk and everything else. I just think that's silly, because how unsafe can you get? So to me, that's my number 5 silliest feature on pre-World War I car. Let's look at number 4. And I have, for number 4, fuel dipsticks. Now, I would much rather have a fuel gauge so that I can just look on the dashboard and see if I need to go and stop for gas. But many of the cars of the vintage and veteran era, they did not have fuel gauges. You had to literally stop the car, open the tank, put a dipstick in it, and see how much gas you had left. So I just think that's a silly thing. And so that's why that's my number 4. Let's go to number 3. Now, number 3, this is rather unique. It was found on the 1909 Turicum car, and it was foot steering. Yeah, it didn't have a steering wheel. It didn't have a steering tiller. It didn't have steering handlebars. It had foot pedals, and you steered it with 2 of pedals on the floor with your feet. This is how you steered this car. I am so happy that this feature did not get popularized, because I just can't imagine trying to steer my car with my feet. So Okay, so that's my number 3, and let's now go to number 2. And this was more popular in America than elsewhere, but I gotta mention it, and that is the mother-in-law seat. Now, this was done on quite a few of the Model T Fords, as well as a number of coach-built cars, but this was the idea of having a little tiny seat way in the back, away from everyone else, away from the driver, and you're secluded, and they called it the mother-in-law seat. I'm talking way back, in 1909, they were calling this the mother-in-law seat, because it's just, from that seat, you're kind of perched up high and you can see everything going, and what are you going to do? You're going to start saying, well, you need to do here, and you get the back seat driver, etc. It's the mother-in-law seat. This is the parent, as it were, parent-in-law of that whole phrase. And so that's my silliness for that. But so let's look at the number 1 silliness. And this was the Moto3 Control, French-built car. I think 1907, around there. They were building it to race, and the idea was, well, hey, if there's no roads, then let's build a car that can go anywhere. Well, here was what they thought to do. They took the fenders and turned the fenders into a portable, collapsible bridge that you could then try to get over ravines and small creeks and such. But if that wasn't enough too, you could then fold those back in a different position and then go grab some pontoons, stick them to them, and grab some paddles and try to get across, whatever. It didn't work. It was useless. It was just, I'm glad they didn't continue that particular idea of trying to make your car become its own bridge. No, feature extinct. So that's the silliness. But boy, have I got a good shout out for you, because if you're watching this channel, you like history stuff. I like history stuff. One of my favorite history channels, military history, as many of you probably know, is one by Mark Felden. But there's a guy right now that I think is just about in that league, and if you have not checked out Northern Historian, you owe it to yourself. Link in the description. Check it out, and here's why. Now, this gentleman is a veteran of the Royal Air Force. His channel, is all about military history and associated history. A lot of airplane stuff, obviously. He retired from the Royal Air Force, so of course he is. But excellent narration, excellent research, and excellent video production. You're going to learn something when you watch this guy's channel. It's worth the binge watch. You can look in his community section. There's kind of a gap, of his production, and there's reasons for it. But he's back on and back on strong, and I strongly suggest like and subscribe to that channel, because, like I said, you're going to learn something. It's well produced, well narrated, well researched. So, and that's what we have for today's The Old Garage, and we will see you next time. Peace.